Have I turned it on?
Yeah, you have turned it on. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is so exciting to do something where we're all in one room together, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. My first one I couldn't actually do in person.
Yeah, and I was going to say congratulations on your first in-person book launch. Your first book launch was last year when we were in lockdown, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, we were just coming out of it, and like in-person events just couldn't happen anymore, and it got cancelled. So this is such a special treat. So thank you, everyone, for coming and making it so special.
Yeah, thank you, and congratulations on the launch of your second book. This is really amazing. It's fantastic. We will go through some questions. So. First one, I'm interested, both of the books you've written deal with serious issues in the context of a thriller. Do the issues drive your stories, or do they emerge after you've begun the story construction process?
So for me, I think the theme that comes through first, I always think of the ending of the story and how I want it to end, but it's the theme and kind of that moral message that I want to get through in my writing. That's always one of the first things that I think of. So in The Girl She Was Before, it's looking at the lasting legacy of a trauma like bullying. I'm someone with a facial difference, I have a birthmark, and those experiences really influenced my writing and impacted me as a person, and I wanted to put that through in the book. Whereas this one is not about bullying. This one is definitely about infidelity and kind of the idea of revenge and exploring that. And the biggest thing is probably toxic masculinity, which is something, quite prevalent, I guess, in society today. And that was something I wanted to discuss in my writing.
Do you find it particularly hard to write about these issues, or is it something that you're so passionate about, any particular issue that you choose for your book, that you're ready to write about these issues?
I think it's a mix of both. Like you can't talk about things like bullying or toxic masculinity without it being upsetting. They are upsetting things to research, they're upsetting things to talk about, but they're things I'm really passionate about, and I think, or I hope, that shines through in the writing and in the conversations I've got to have with book clubs and people around the world, just talking about those things and almost raising awareness of just those discussions. So it's not the easiest thing to write about sometimes, but those themes thrillers are so accessible that I feel like it's really important to put things like that in something that's quite easily to consume and so accessible, so you can open up those conversations.
And in this particular book, was there a scene that you found very difficult to write about, or was it all kind of a challenge?
Yeah, I think in this one, it's very hard to say without spoiling it. I said to myself, don't spoil the ending tonight. Yeah. There's one thing, don't spoil the ending.
That is always the challenge, yes.
But I think actually, as the blurb says, Jamie's life, kind of a lot of it takes place in the darkest corners of the internet, and some of those parts were quite hard to write because they go against quite strongly who I am as a person and what I believe in. But a lot of that research I found kind of on very public forums, like comment feeds on Instagram and places that you wouldn't expect to find toxic masculinity being so obvious. So I'd say they were the hardest bits to write, but also I think in the end they're probably the most rewarding bits, because they're the bits that I guess really stick with people and make them have that strong emotion.
You mentioned research a couple of times. So what is your process with research? Do you research a whole bunch at the beginning, or do you do it as you're writing? How does that work for you?
So I feel like I've made myself sound like a much better researcher than I am. Like, it's not my strong point. But when I have the idea, so in this case toxic masculinity, the idea came to me and I was like, when you're building it in your mind and you're trying to build that story, so then that was when I looked on just Instagram comment feeds or certain news outlet comments on certain articles and stuff, and that was more my research. I think it's very much in the idea stage. Once I'm writing, I don't research much from that point.
And what was it about toxic masculinity, that issue, that sort of made you think, actually, I want to spend, because it's a large chunk of time to dedicate to writing to a book, right? So what made you think, actually, I've got something to say about this, and I really want to pick this issue up and sort of look at it analytically, but through a fictitious thriller lens?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we all think is in a really dark, obscure place of the internet, but it's there in front of you in everyday lives. Like, people comment the worst things on people's pictures, they send horrible messages to people, and there's so much like misogyny just like weaved into things. I do like the world is a great place, but I feel like when you notice those things, it's just there, it's in front of you, and I wanted to address that in the book, kind of how, you know, sometimes the people that I was seeing these comments, you'd look on their picture and they'd have a photo of them with their wife and their 2 children, and they had this really wholesome image, and then, you know, they were saying just the worst things to people. And I find that so interesting that we have these like online personas that can be so different to who we are in real life.
The duality of that.
Yeah, and that, you know, if you're confronted by that, I imagine people would be like, no, that's not him, he wouldn't do that. But, you know, online gives you that mask, it gives you that escapism that you can do that.
Yeah. And the book has been out for a few days now. So in terms of issues and your previous book as well, because that was, as you said, about bullying, what sort of response have you had from your readers? Like, do they actually go, yeah, actually it really prompted discussion with me, my friends, you know, people I know? Is that something that you've heard from your readers?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few book club people here tonight, like, hi. But I've been lucky enough to visit book clubs kind of around Australia and the world, and some of the conversations about, especially with my first book, bullying, I think when I said that it's from having a facial birthmark and kind of opening up those conversations, people would share their own experiences, and sometimes it was really, obviously felt honoured that people would share those really tough times with you, and then kind of opening up in front of their peers and their friends and stuff. It's kind of a privilege to be a part of conversations like that, and I've done some work with Bully Zero, the charity in Australia, just trying to open up those conversations a bit more. So I actually think it's putting it in fiction is quite a good way to get those conversations starting, because book clubs always have the questions at the end, don't they? And it prompts that amazing conversation. Yeah,
and it's also an interesting way because it's fiction, so you know, it opens the door to many different points of view and sort of questions, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So your second book, which we're looking at right now, I'm so impressed. So exciting. It's a great title. How did we, or you, I should say, how did you decide on that title?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say sorry, Jack, Colin. My partner is here. I feel like I had to bring him to be like, he's okay.
And you're okay, Jack. You're okay. Okay, good. Just wanted to chat. We can chat later. Yep.
I like blink twice. But it's just, I guess one of the biggest themes in the story is revenge, and when you are seeking revenge, I think your ultimate goal is to destroy someone or destroy some part of someone's life. And one of the questions I hope the book asks is revenge worth it? Like, is it putting your energy into that? Is that a good thing? I always like book titles with questions as well, because I feel like I leave the shop thinking, maybe I'm going to think of that a bit more. So I guess those two came together for that.
Yeah. And is revenge worth it, do you think?
Again, without spoiling anything. I was like, maybe dependent on the circumstance, but I definitely think...
Just generally speaking.
Yeah, probably not. Like, I think you got to give karma credit. Karma does a really good job of righting those wrongs. And I also think it can change who you are sometimes. When you're seeking revenge, I think you lose yourself in it a little bit, as Cassie most definitely does in this story, fully loses herself to her revenge. Yeah.
What I found so interesting about this book is, well, firstly, this is the first book I've ever read on a Kindle. Well, I read it on this iPad, actually, because I like to hold the book, smell the book, turn the page, you know, all that sort of stuff, and kind of flip through it and go, how much have I got left, you know, anyway. But I got the Kindle copy way before they were available, so I thought, okay, you gotta do this. And I just couldn't put it down. I read it, I think, in like a day and a half or something, you know. Woo! I did put it down a couple of times, I mean, but it was really gripping. But what I thought was so interesting was that it's, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but it is, it's a really simple idea. You know, like, simple ideas are often really great, you know. But what you write in such a gripping way. So, and I found it so interesting that the whole book is just this idea that of this infidelity. How did you do that? Because it was really clever.
Thank you. I was like, hadn't been called clever for a while.
Well, you know.
I was like, say it again. I think it's just, for me, the stories I enjoy most are the stories that really get you in your emotions, and infidelity obviously is such a brutal, shocking thing to go through, and the impact of that and the way it makes people feel, it's very physical. I think you can have the emotional side, but you feel it in your body, and that anger to kind of right that wrong stuff. I just found that really interesting. I personally enjoy reading thrillers that are more psychological based, and I really wanted to get into that exploration of Cassie, so kind of obviously staying with her the whole time, and because she does lose herself to her revenge, there's no other way to explain it, and I wanted to stay with her to explore that. I think it made her a little bit more relatable and believable by sticking with her through it.
And you also, like thrillers are about, sort of dropping enough breadcrumbs or laying enough clues down, but not giving away the end, but also kind of, the classic red herring and, all that sort of stuff. So how did you do that? This is your second process. I'm interested to know, in your second go around with the book, how did you do that? Because I would imagine it's very difficult writing something when you know everything, the outcome, how it's going to end, all that sort of stuff. So how do you do that and still kind of trick yourself that you're not giving it away?
I think editing is so important. I remember in my first book, there's a character, Sanena, who in my first draft just disappeared halfway through the story. She just was never heard of again. And my editor was like, "What, is she okay?"
And she wasn't murdered. She wasn't murdered.
She wasn't murdered. I was like, forgot about her. Yeah, sure, she's in the story. So I think it's definitely hard when you know the storyline and where you want it to go and what you want to happen. But this one was actually harder to write than the first one. So I normally have the idea of how I want something to end. And then in the first book, because it was a lot more crime-based, it was so much easier to put in the clues and hide the little bits throughout. Whereas this, it's a lot more of a domestic thriller, so you're not doing a whodunit, you're not putting the vase in the living room of this person. It's not quite at that point. So this one was actually harder to do, but I'm glad there were some clues in there.
So it was harder because it was more of a domestic drama or domestic thriller rather than a crime-based thriller. Is that?
Yeah, because I think when you're reading a crime-based book, I don't know about you, but I kind of go into it looking for the clues. I go in and being like, you were here on Wednesday, that's when the crime happened. You go into it thinking of that. Whereas this, I think you've got to be a little bit more subtle in certain things Jamie says, being like, "Oh, is that gaslighting? Is that, that kind of double layer questions?" I think it's more subtle in this, which is probably harder to write.
And talking about editing, also early in the process, how important are beta readers, people who actually pick up the pages and sort of read it for the first time, and how anxiety provoking is that? Or not?
Terrifying. Well, because about 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't really say it. It was my dirty secret. I was like, I want to be an author. I just wasn't confident in it. I was really shy about it. So to actually be at this point now, talking about books and stuff was great. But my friend Katie, I feel like calling people out in the audience today, she's actually one of the first people I always share my ideas with and kind of have a bit of a chat with, and her feedback has been just amazing throughout the process. So I think getting that early, when you're close to the story, like you said before, you know how it's going to end, you know who's the baddie, who's the goodie, you know the twist. So actually getting outsiders' feedback to be like, I thought it was Wednesday, now it's Friday, that kind of thing really, really does help.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I'm going to call it, because I think it's all over social, so I don't think I'm giving away a secret, that you turned 28, is that right?
29.
Oh, 29, sorry.
I will be 28 if you want me to be.
That was a very distant memory for me, 29. But anyway, what I'm interested in is you said when I was much younger, I didn't have the confidence to say that I wanted to be a writer. But it's a very common thing that I think writers say. What do you think is behind that? And for them, or for widely, and for you, what was that? And how did you get the confidence?
Well, still not, no, I'm joking. I think it's the fear of, not ridicule, but I feel when people I want to be a teacher, I want to be a doctor, it's a very you go do this, you earn this much, you do that. Whereas writer, it's a little bit more, what are you writing? Oh, I don't read that genre. It's a bit more, there's questions, you don't really have a set work schedule, you don't have a set income, you don't have that kind of, I just think it's not as well known, I guess, as a career in certain ways. And then it's also not embarrassing, but you put so much of yourself into your books. You put so much time and effort. And even if you try to be really detached to your characters, I still think there's a little part of yourself that comes through. So the thought of putting it out there and somebody saying, oh, this is terrible, I hated her, you're like, do you hate me? And you're not the same person. It's not the same thing. But I think because you put so much into it, it goes like that. But I think moving to Australia was kind of the thing that did it. Moving to Australia and writing a book were always my two goals, and then I unfortunately lost a friend in the UK, and it just pushed me to be like, we'll move to Australia then, that's what you've always wanted to do. And then I got here and I was like, well, you've done that, and that turned out okay. It turned out really well. So I was like, well, go for it then, and then here we are.
That's quite amazing. I mean, do you kind of look at that and you think, wow, I actually did that?
Oh, all the time. I was talking to Jack earlier about how it just still doesn't feel real. My first book, I don't mean I didn't enjoy it, but I just didn't think I'd earned it. I didn't think I was worthy of it. When I was talking to people and they said they'd enjoyed it, I was like, why are you saying that? It was this really weird situation. Yeah. I was like, is it because I'm stood in front of you? Whereas now I think I'm in the groove of it a little bit more. I'm like, no, you have worked hard on this, you've had that, but it definitely is just a building confidence thing.
And has it, I guess, going through the publishing process and putting your book out there and that sort of thing, has that been, what has been surprising about that for you?
How much resilience you need to have. It is a very brutal industry. Lots of near misses, lots of this is great, lots of kind of I was signed at one point then dropped, a whole series of highs and lows. So I think it's just that resilience, and I think you've kind of got to have this really weird belief in yourself that storytelling is what you're supposed to do. And there's times when you just want to give up, there's times where you read what you've written and you're like, who trusted me with a pen? Yeah.
So you do have those times where you want to give up?
Oh yeah, like today. They happen all the time.
But what makes you get back up on the horse, so to speak? What gives you that sort of push?
I think just knowing that I'd be upset if I didn't. I think it's that bit where I was always that kid that was writing and reading stories and I was probably really annoying, going to my teacher and being like, Miss, I've got a story idea. I've always known that's kind of what I want to do, and I think if I gave up, I think I'd feel like I'd not done what I was supposed to.
Yeah. In this book, I'm interested, aside from Cassie, who would be your favourite character and why?
Well, Cassie's got a great
group of friends. It's Sophie's choice, right?
Yeah. I want to be all her friends. I feel like there's a friend in the book called Lily who, the name was actually, I did a giveaway on my Instagram page saying that you could choose the name of a character in my book, and a lady called Jade chose the name for her daughter. And it just so happened that she won, and Lily is the name of my oldest friend. And I was like, that's so nice. I feel like I put a lot of her traits and stuff in there, and just being like how kind and generous and stuff she is. So yeah, Lily would be I like them all, apart from Jamie, but like everyone else.
But they're not all, I mean, he's not all evil. There's something good in there, isn't there?
Maybe if you ask his mother. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I think it was interesting to explore his character, someone that leans obviously quite heavily into toxic masculinity and stuff, but hopefully not paint him out like you say as just a total villain. There's obviously something that's led him to those beliefs and tendencies. So no, I don't think he's all bad. I just would not want my friend marrying him.
No, of course. Yeah, I can understand that. What response have you had from male readers? Has it been different from female readers, or?
I actually, the male readers were the first reviews I got back, and they loved it.
Yeah, right.
Where you're a bit going, oh, how to destroy your husband? Is it a bit of a book that your husbands might be like, are you okay? Is everything all right? Oh,
Jack.
Blink twice. But no, the response is genuinely being great. Hopefully, like I said, opens up some conversations and things. But I have had some conversations with male readers being like, I know people who've expressed views or things like that. And I'm hoping that through it, next time that happens, they might call it out a little bit and say, that's not actually okay to say.
Yeah. You've just actually can't quite believe this, but you've just actually finished writing your third book. Can you believe that?
I can, I'm very tired.
It's like when you told me, I was like, oh my goodness. Can you give us any kind of hints or clues or teasers about that book? And when will it come out?
I don't know the release date just yet, but I know I wrote it. It's darker than this story, so kind of when I was talking with my publisher about the career I wanted, I knew I wanted to always write thrillers that had a message, but I didn't want to be formulaic in it, that it was always a crime book, that it was always, a whodunit. I wanted to, I guess, keep readers on their toes and also myself interested for the months it takes to write the book. So my kind of plan was this is still dark in its thriller way, but the next book is much darker. It kind of is based around someone who survived a serial killer, and then 10 years later there's someone else that comes back and is copying them. So much darker, but still has got a lot of, I guess, the same themes or things I want to talk about, and having like a real key central issue to it that's quite, I guess, difficult to talk about, but something that I think needs to be talked about.
Any themes that you can tell us about, or is that giving too much away?
No, I'll go for it, it's only been recorded. I think the theme of the perfect victim is something that really intrigues me, why are some crimes really heavily reported on and others just completely ignored? Just that idea and that kind of, what justifies all that attention, that's something that's always interested me. So it's that's one of the themes explored in the next book.
Serial killer, that's quite different, I would say, than both of the books that you've written so far. Did you find that, because I find them particularly disturbing myself, did you find it hard to write that?
Well, I don't know what this says about me. I think I'm a really nice person. I'll preface this answer by saying that. But I think almost you detach yourself from it. So if anyone here's read The Girl She Was Before, there's a scene, I'll call it the toilet scene, and anyone who's read it will be like, oh yeah. That people always come to me and say, I don't know how you wrote that, it was really kind of distressing to read about that bullying scene. Whereas I was like, oh yeah, that would be bad, and kind of wrote it. And I think there's a level of detachment, I guess, when you're writing it, because you're thinking more about the placement of the word, or if I put a question here, how will that make the reader feel? So I think you can be detached, but obviously it's a horrific subject to be writing about serial killers, but I just don't, I think when you're doing it, you can have a good detachment. Research is a little bit harder, it's not the most fun thing to read up on.
With this book, How to Destroy Your Husband, it ends on a cliffhanger, and I'm interested because you're writing your third book is yet again another different character, I would imagine. If this is a different character, the first book. Is Cassie going to come back? Do you feel like, I'm going to miss her, and it's a cliffhanger, and there might be another book there, and, people like me get attached to, you've got to think about the readers, we get attached to the character.
I'm so sorry.
But is that something you think maybe will happen in the future?
I love ending a book on a kind of or reading books that end on a bit of a jarring note, so you're like, oh my gosh, it was like Gone Girl. I know it wasn't the end, it was the middle, but that twist, I was like, I need to speak to someone about this, and I love that feel of that kind of franticness. So I hope to, I'm obviously not comparing myself to Gone Girl, but hope to kind of emulate that feeling. And maybe not in this one. I think I'd like to leave it to the readers to decide what happens to Cassie next. You can decide. But in the first book, I think I have some ideas for a sequel, but I think it would be further down the line. I can see people that have read the first one being like, how? but I have ideas.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. You are quite prolific. We've talked about, your first book, your second book, and now your third book. Does writing come easily to you? Do you walk around and go, oh, that's a good idea for a book, or that's a good idea, or see a news item, that's a good idea, and sort of have a little notebook? How do you choose your ideas, because it is a big commitment, as we've said, and then the process, is it easy for you, or is it getting easier for you?
I think I would say getting easier as in identifying which idea I want to go with. So I do have a lot of ideas. I find, just walking down Balmain High Street, you can hear a snippet of a conversation and be a bit like, ooh, kind of it can spark a bit of imagination from you from there. But I think as time's gone on, I've learned to kind of decide what's a good idea and what ones are the ones that probably can go on the back burner and, you know, maybe come back to in a few months, in a few years. But I definitely have like a graveyard of manuscripts that have got, you know, like 10,000 words in. But that one day could be the next one, but at the minute are just very sadly staring at me, wanting me to finish them.
But is it an instinct thing though? Like, how do you, like you said, you're getting better at choosing what is a good idea. Is that an experience thing? Is it an instinct thing? Is it a combination of both? How does that work for you?
I think it helps kind of because I read a lot of thrillers. I think I know what I like to read. I'm on the Bookstagram community and just, I guess, seeing what books are not popular, but seeing ideas and stuff that are out there. And then I'm very lucky, like I said, to have some great friends that I can bounce ideas off with. So I think when you talk it through, or when you like over dinner, I'm like, Jack, I've had another story idea. I imagine he's like, oh. Yeah. But it's that kind of thing when it feels like you could keep talking about it, or when as you're talking about it something else comes into your brain. I think that's when it clicks in me a bit more.
And then what is your process? Then you decide on an idea, and then do you know, because I've discovered there's no right way to write a book. It's really about what is the right way for you. So for you, what is the right way to write a book?
So I spend a hell of a lot of time daydreaming at first. So I have, I'll make like a playlist that I think is a bit atmospheric, or what I kind of want the atmosphere of the book to be. And then I spend a lot of time just daydreaming, just weeks daydreaming and being like, no, I'm working. Like, just listen to Taylor Swift on repeat, I'm working. But I kind of imagine the idea in my head like a film, and I'll play it again and again, and then maybe add a different scene, or take one thing out, or introduce a new character, and just play it till I guess it feels like a story, it feels coherent to me, and then I just write what I've seen, and then editors help me be like, you did leave that character out.
So you really do kind of ruminate on it for quite some time. You're not writing any notes, or?
I probably write a few notes, and there's loads of like scraps of notebooks and papers and stuff everywhere, but you know those people that have that amazing wall and it's like colour-coded post-its and all this, and it looks brilliant, but I feel like I would look at that and be like, oh, I don't know what to do. Mine's a bit more scatty.
Yeah, you're right. That's really interesting. So you really keep it in your head, and then you kind of sit down and write.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. I think anyone who can say that they've talked to me around the time where I start writing it down, it's probably quite hard to have a coherent conversation with me, because I'm a bit like, oh, this could happen halfway through, like. Yeah, right. But it very much lives in my head, and then, like I said, just write what I've seen.
Do you so you don't outline or plan? There's the pantser and the plotter. Yeah. You're more of a pantser.
For sure, a pantser. But then when I've done my first draft, I will kind of plot it out a little bit and write it. But yeah, it's just, I think I'm just much more of a visual person. So I think finding it and imagining it like a film and that kind of stuff really helps me see it.
And do you ever get in a situation where you've written yourself into a corner, or is it very much kind of because you can see it? It's out there for you, you know?
Sometimes when you're writing, it sounds ridiculous because they're made up people, but sometimes your characters do things that you're like, oh, okay, we'll see where this one goes. And so you can end up going on like weird tangents that you didn't think when you're writing it, but at that point I'd probably stop and go back to Taylor Swift, go back to daydreaming and just imagining it a little bit more. But yeah, I think just for the most part it is mostly in my head, and then I try rein it in, try pull it back. But I always have the idea for the ending first, because they're my favourite bits in thrillers. Like I want the shocking end, so that's the bit that I go with and then work from there.
And you were mentioning that you sort of talk to Jack about these ideas. Do you test the ideas? Like, this is the beginning, this is the end. Like, do you know the end actually when you start writing a book? Some people start with the end. Yeah,
I always start with the end. In my first book, it's got quite a shocking ending, and people are like, that was the end you picked first? I'm like, yes, it was. And then kind of work back. So my new book, Jack knows little bits about, but I feel like probably not as much as my other ones. But yeah, I like to talk and sound it out and talk to people about it. Just, I guess, the best conversations come from when you're bouncing things off people and stuff, like, you know, kind of that collaboration.
Yeah. So you're off to Denmark next year. Very exciting, on a book tour. As part of a book tour, so you're going to the UK, I think, as well.
Yes.
And can you just tell us a bit about that? Because you've told me a bit about it. It sounds pretty cool.
It was the coolest thing to ever happen to me, ever. My book's been picked up by a Danish publisher, and I was was like, oh, okay. And then they were like, oh, do you want to come out to Denmark and do a book tour? Well, yes.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually busy.
Sorry,
yeah.
I'm busy.
Yeah, no, I'm washing my hair that week.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I'm going out to Denmark next year, and I'm going to be doing a crime festival there that's held in like an abandoned prison, which I was like, whoa, this is the coolest moment of my life. So I'm doing that, and then I'm hopefully going to tie in some like different events and stuff in the UK, and then meet some readers and some book clubs that I've been speaking to out there. So it should be a good trip. I think should be going for about 6 to 7 weeks, and get to see family and stuff there as well, which will be really nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely makes me feel cool to be like, I'm going on a book tour in Denmark.
It's so exciting. It's so exciting. What do your family in the UK think of your books?
I mean, they've told me they like them, but I guess they're my family. Like they can't really.
Have they gone, oh, wouldn't have expected that from you, or you know what I mean? Or is it like, oh, I know something more about you, or I did expect that?
I think it's one of those really interesting things. I think most people that know me, I imagine they think I'd probably write like romance books. Like I'm quite, I'm like bubbly and stuff, and then I'm like, no, there's a murder. So very different to how I come across. But I think my family are obviously, it's hard for them being in the UK and not being here and like being able to celebrate and stuff in person. My mum actually sent me some earrings to wear for the launch. It's just like roses, they match the book. Yeah. So it's really, they're just so proud. Like it's so nice. This book's dedicated to my niece Poppy, who was born a year ago. And when the book arrived, my brother sent me a picture of Poppy with the book. I was like, oh, Poppy reading How to Destroy Your Husband. What a bedtime story!
Early, right?
Yeah, so, I was like, I'll train you, Poppy. I'll train you.
So you wouldn't have seen them. This will be the first time you see them.
We went back in March last year, so I saw them. So I did get to do, but it was like a 2-week trip. It was very much a lot of jet lag, just never really recovering from it and things. So hopefully this time when it's a bit longer, get to see them for a little bit more and just enjoy it and celebrate.
And did you at that time? Did you get to see? Well, your first book wouldn't have been launched then. Is that right?
It was out probably like 3-4 months maybe.
Did you meet any readers?
Yeah, I like talked a lot online and stuff, but because it was 2 weeks, we were very much meeting family and things. But this time I've got some really cool like meetups set up and things, and so I'm very much looking forward to it. Do
you find there's a difference between readers in different countries?
Oh, good question. I find I don't put a setting in my book. Like this mentions pound signs at one point, so I'm like hints that it's in the UK. But for me as a reader, unless the story really needs to be in, I don't know, New York or Sydney, the setting I don't really attach to. And then I think because some of the themes I like to write about are quite universal, like bullying happens everywhere. You know, we can pretend it doesn't happen in certain schools or certain areas, but it does. It happens everywhere. Toxic masculinity. Just look on any famous person's comment feed on their Instagram, you will see it there. These things are everywhere, so I feel like by not putting it to a specific place, you kind of can open up those conversations. So it's really interesting when you talk to book clubs in Australia and people say, oh, I imagined it in Australia, and then in England they're like, I thought it was California, or just kind of all over. So yeah, I think there's just a difference. You kind of relate it to what you know, where your like what your world is around you, I guess.
Well, yeah, that is right, because when I was reading it, I thought it was in Pyrmont. I don't know why. Maybe because I lived there for a long time. But and then when I saw the pound, and I think there was a reference to Edinburgh at some point, I was like, oh, this is the UK, but I still thought it was in Pyrmont. It was like a really strange experience. But
Pyrmont, UK,
Pyrmont, UK. But I was going to say, did you, because there are so many Australian books out at the moment, that really focus on the landscape and the description of the environment and all that sort of stuff. Not necessarily even, I'm not talking about bushfire per se, but even urban, crime thrillers, a sense of place. Did you feel any pressure to kind of, follow that model at all?
I feel like I've always, like I said, the theme's the thing that matters to me most. I feel that's the bit I most connect with when I'm a reader. So I feel like, to me, that's the bit I kind of want to get across. I really admire all the people that like build those worlds and things like that. But as a reader, sometimes those parts I don't connect with. But I'm like, okay, where's the action? That kind of thing. So because I wanted to talk about universal themes, I think I describe settings that anyone can relate to. We've all seen, I don't know, an abandoned house or something like that. But I wanted to keep it more, I guess, universal, because I talk to readers in America, in the UK, in different places like that, so it's quite nice to be able to talk, and then they go, oh, I imagined it was down the street, and that kind of thing. I think it opens up that audience and that discussion a little bit more.
Just on that audience discussion topics, and you mentioned, you talk to readers from all over the world, you have a very, I'd say very compelling social media presence. It's very, it's really, I mean, you communicate really clearly and frankly with your readers and your audience, and you have clearly got a point of view and you've made a decision on how to do that. Is that just a natural thing that you kind of fell into, or did you make a decision to do that? Because not every writer is necessarily, sort of comfortable with doing that kind of stuff, So was it a choice, or was it something that just kind of happened?
Yeah, I think meeting readers is my favourite bit. It's absolutely the best bit about being published. I get so many book recommendations. I've never had a TBR list as long. I'm always like, I'll try and read that one next. But it's the best bit. Like, you get to talk to people from around the world. You get to hear their opinions. You get to just have those conversations. And I feel like, as cheesy as it might sound, you've made friends, and you kind of, the people that I connect with online, it feels like a really supportive, friendship-based place. There are people here tonight that I've only ever spoke to online until today, and it's so lovely to kind of have that. And readers give so much. They review, they'll share it with their friends, and I do feel like the least I can do is almost talk back and share that with them, and it's just so nice to have that connection and that relationship. Yeah.
And can I just ask you, before we go to the audience for questions, what would be the most interesting or unexpected piece of feedback or comment that you've had from a reader? It's putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I was like, oh. I wouldn't say unexpected, but with my first book talking about bullying and facial differences, it doesn't talk about it, but it's inspired by having a facial difference. Just, it's kind of unexpected when people share their stories with you about their bullying experiences. It's really humbling. I think when I put the book out there, I didn't expect anyone would, want to talk to me about that, because I'm not, I'm not a trained psychologist or anything like that, but I'm someone that, has lived that, has had those experiences. So that's probably not quite answering your question, but I'd say the feedback of just people trusting you enough to share in that, it's such a powerful thing, and that's probably been one of the best bits about being published, is having that connection with people about those kind of things that are quite difficult to talk about sometimes.
Yeah. It is a social contract, I guess, people connect with the book, and then they feel, open enough or safe enough to be vulnerable enough to talk about their own stories. So it's great that you can actually create that with the books and the stories that you tell.
Well, because I'm quite open about having a birthmark. I'm quite obviously it's on my face. I can't, but I talk about it quite freely, and I've done a lot of advocacy work for it. So I feel like because I put it out there that this is me and it's okay. We can talk about it. It's really nice to have that reciprocated and accepted, and people feel, I guess, safe with you, which is really nice.
Yeah. Thank you, Jess. I think we have some time now for questions from the floor, from the audience. Now, what I might ask you to do is just raise your little hand and ask the question. I will repeat it for people who are watching live and also watching the recording later. So anyone have a question? Don't be shy. Oh, here we go. I'm going to go over here first. Sorry, what's your name? Hannah.
So the two books are really feel really different to each other when you read. When you were writing, was it really hard to keep things separate? Did you find yourself, I can't use that name again? Or was it actually quite easy and you were able to kind of just stay in two totally different worlds?
So the question was, the two books are quite separate or quite different, and was it difficult for you to keep the two worlds separate and use different names and different descriptions, different locations, etc. in both books?
I read a really interesting thing today from an author called Frida McFadden, and some woman said, oh, you mentioned a snowflake necklace twice, and she was like, oh, when I finish a book, it's done in my head. She was like, I didn't realise I'd done that. And I feel a little bit similar, as in, you obviously, there are things you remember, but I imagine at some point I'll probably reuse names. Maybe I just don't know that many names. But I feel like, they were thematically I wanted them to be different. It was the first book's quite a dark headspace to be in, you know, talking about bullying and revisiting those kind of emotions. And then this one's obviously about infidelity, which is still dark, but it's just not quite as personal to me. So it felt different writing them, but I could definitely disconnect them. The hardest bit now is talking about book 2 while writing book 3 and planning book 4, and I was like, I don't. One day I'm just going to start talking about the wrong person. yeah.
Like what?
There are many characters walking around this head right now, going, "Talk about me, talk about me."
That's actually a really good idea for a book. You know,
book 5.
Yeah. I can see the cover actually. Yeah. I think it was Siobhan. I think it was in the back.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the character Debbie, who I really liked, and who seemed to be the voice of like a conscience through the book. Is that how you felt about her, or is it just because I'm older that I related to her?
So the question was about the character of Debbie. Was she the voice of the conscience in the book, and is that how you kind of wrote her?
Well, it's actually really interesting. My first draft of the book originally had a totally different ending, just because I just wanted it to go a different way, in one like multi-universe, just a different ending where it was different. But actually, my original draft, Debbie and Cassie were not close. So Debbie told her what had happened. She sees Jamie obviously with another woman, so she told her, and then because she was the person that knew, Cassie almost took it out on her, like all the things that she was keeping in, she took it out on her. But then through kind of like beta readers and different things like that and edits, my publisher was like, I think you actually could really have like you say, a voice of reason, like a conscience in the book. And then I made those changes, and I'm so glad I did, because Debbie's like one of my favourite characters. I feel like I want a Debbie in my life, offering to make me lunches and brush my hair.
and that would make Cassie more likeable as well, I think.
Yeah, because I have like not an issue, but I always feel like in thrillers, you know, when we say, I want the female character to be likeable, I've never read a book where they've said I want the male character to be likeable. It's just, you know, you can have like a male protagonist in a thriller that like drinks a lot, that, you know, trashes things, gets really angry and stuff, and he's very like, ugh, and everyone's like, what a good guy, he does his job at the end of the day. Like, you know, the woman like one time doesn't, I don't know, say like thank you to the waitress, and people like, she just wasn't likeable. So I feel like that's kind of a thing that I always want to kind of push a little bit. Like Cassie does things that are likeable, are not very likeable. Like she makes some bad choices, but I still want her to, you know, we're human, we're all flawed. Like, you know, no one's perfect. And when you're put in these really hard situations, you're not always yourself. You don't always make your best choices. And I like to play on that idea of like likability. And I think I've just derailed that answer. I'm so sorry. That's a different question.
No, it's fine. We'll go back to the audience. Another question. Yes, over here.
Hi. We've talked about the writing. When you have a book idea, do you have an idea of what the cover's going to look like? And how do you decide on the final print?
The final.
Print of the
Okay. So when you have... Sorry, can you repeat that again? I'm just completely confused.
When you have an idea for a book,
Yeah.
how do you have an idea of what the cover's
That's
going
it.
to look like?
Okay.
And how do you decide on the final version?
So when you have an idea for a book, do you have an idea for the cover at the same time and also the style?
So I have like a few ideas, and I'm very lucky my publisher takes a lot of my ideas on board. We have quite a collaborative process with it. So probably not when I'm writing, but when it's finished and I've got like the full kind of picture in my head, then I'll start pulling things out. And I usually make terrible mock-ups. I shared one I made for this on social media, and honestly, it was appalling. But somehow my publisher took my awful design and turned it into this. I don't know what wizardry they worked, but I was like, wow. So it always comes after, but it's very collaborative. Like we share ideas and stuff, and they'll send like multiple mock-ups, and we'll probably pull stuff from one and do it like that, and then get the final result.
And when you saw that for the first time, what did you do?
I was like, Jack, look at my cover.
And what did you think, Jack?
It looks great. We took life, otherwise, I guess it would just be very sad.
Yeah.
I was saying to you at the beginning of this that one thing for all the bookstagrammers out there, not designed this purposely, but you know when you're holding books and you take a photo and your thumb always covers the picture, I was like going to put a gap there because then when you take a photo and hold it,
I love that. That's what I mean. You are truly like you're a master in the social media. Like it's just fantastic. You're thinking about all the marketing opportunities and all that sort of stuff. It's
yeah,
great.
I was like, I'm going to hold it. Yeah, that's perfect. Just perfect thumb size.
Catherine, I think you had a question down the back.
I haven't read the book yet, so that's a treat in store for me. Social media, so the book is, if I'm right, about what happens in the dark, nasty corners of the internet and social media, I'm not sure, but did it change your attitude to and use of the virtual world?
Did it takes place with, you know, the dark corners in social media, did it actually change the way that you use social media?
That's a very good question. When I first came to Australia, I was interviewing like women about kind of, I guess, hard-hitting things that had happened to them, such as people that had had quite horrific illnesses or ectopic pregnancies and certain things like that. And just, I guess, I've always wanted to talk about quite difficult subjects. But part of doing that, sometimes you get quite nasty feedback from people, being, you know, if you talk about, I know, body image, that people will be saying like, oh, you should just lose some weight or things like that. So I feel like I've always been aware of that side of things, but I've kind of curated my feeds really well so that, like, honestly, my social media, my Instagram, I'm like, I can't wait to get on and talk to everyone today. Like, I think it can change your way of looking at it if you go into those spaces, but I feel like I've almost built like a protective wall almost around myself with it, just because I guess, like you said, I spend quite a lot of time online. I love talking to readers and I want it to be a positive place to go into. I don't really want it to be infected by that kind of negativity.
It's a very good skill. It's a skill though. Like it's not just doesn't come naturally to everybody. It's a skill. So you must have either cultivated that and sort of you must police that, or I mean, you know, like watch that yourself.
Oh yeah, I feel like I'm always on my phone. But like I follow people that have got kind of similar interests. I feel like, you know, I follow lots of people that talk about books. You know, I surround myself with great friends and things. I think when you've definitely got to be on it. You've got to curate it and really like focus on it, because those things are there. I think these days on the internet you're going to see things that upset you. You know, you can be looking at a video of a puppy and someone will say something terrible. Like it's just the way it is. But I feel like when you've surround yourself with, you might have seen that, but then I don't know. Oh, look at your friend's new book. That's great. Like, you know, you kind of build it.
Yeah. Yes.
So this second novel is sort of like, I haven't read it yet either. I bought it today, but so it's like a suspense mystery thriller, a bit like The Girl She Was Before. Is that, you've obviously signed a deal with your publisher to do several more books. Is that sort of like your genre that you want to stick to? Because I know that you, as an avid reader, that's something you really enjoy reading. Is that the genre that you want to stick to, like throughout the next couple of books, or do you think you could maybe see yourself also sort of doing like a romance book, or like going into the fantasy genre? Or I'm just curious to know like how your thought process works when you come up with these stories. Is it kind of like a character walks into your head with a background story and you kind of just go from there? Or are you like, no, I am a thriller gal?
So the question is, you have, you know, a book deal with, you know, you're delivering a number of books, and suspense, thriller, crime is really where you've been writing and you'd like to read that. Is that what you always see yourself as writing, or do characters walk in, and do you think you'll have a character walk in and there'll be a romance character? You know, and also you change genres, you know, like do you see yourself sticking with this genre?
I feel like if I wrote a romance, it would be terrible. It would be like boy meets girl or girl meets boy. You know, like
or
it would be very
would be murdered.
Yeah. They would meet at like a forensic dig over a body. You know, there'd be something.
Yeah.
Like I don't think I'd be a very good romance writer.
They wouldn't make it out of the escape room. Yeah.
I'm like, you mean they're happy at the end? I don't understand what that is. And so maybe not romance, but I do think I have a million ideas, but there is kind of an idea I'm working on that's a bit more, I guess, kind of like contemporary fiction, but for the most part, I think it's going to be thrillers. Like it's the genre I like to read, and it's the genre I like to write. I love a twist. I love that bit when like a reader messages you and goes like, "What? You're like, I know."
Yeah, I love that. I love that feeling when you know, it's 3:00 in the morning, you wake up and you go, "I've got to pick the book up, but I'm really going to be tired." We're nearly to time. Yes, please. That's a good question. Would you ever consider collaborating with another writer on a dual perspective book? And if you would, who would you choose as a writer to collaborate with?
Such a good question. Well, first of all, I feel sorry for any writer that has to work with me being like, oh, we could do this, oh, we could do that. Too scary. But I actually think the book that first got me into loving thrillers, I think for most people, was Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl. Like, I just remember being like, oh my gosh, I need to read this. So I think if I ever met her, first of all, I'd probably pass out. But like, it would be amazing to write a book with her. But then, you know, where you just be like, you write it all, you're the genius. So maybe, Gillian Flynn, if you're watching, you know, call me.
Yes, that's right. Call me. Yes, in the back.
You spoke about watching the story play out in your head and how that kind of helped the creative process. Do you ever see your stories making it to the big or little screen as well as the page?
So the question was, you talked about how you saw the story playing out, you know, as a film, or seeing it first and ruminating, kind of thinking about it, and then writing it down. But do you see this, you know, your books becoming, you know, either a series on television or film, etc.?
I mean, a girl can dream. Like, I would love that to happen. I think one of the things I like about my writing is that I don't overly describe characters, so I feel like it's kind of open to interpretation, you know, what that person would look like, who you would cast in that role. I quite like doing that, but yes, it would definitely be the dream. If anyone's got any contacts at Netflix, like, now's the time to tell me. But yeah, I'd love to. The only character I've ever had like a very clear vision of is Tara in How to Destroy Your Husband, and I feel like Phoebe Denver from Bridgerton, like the first series, that's just who I pictured when I was writing it, but for the most part, I'm like, anyone could be them. But Phoebe
Actually, do you picture people when you're writing your characters, or is it just sort of their kind of a collage of features?
I think it's more of a like a collage. So when people would say to me, "Who are you going to cast?" I'm like, yeah, who do you think? I always have to like ask it back. Who do you think would be good? I'll write that name down. But that's the only person that I was like, oh, I can see you as that person. Everyone else. In the first book, in The Girl She Was Before, I was like, the husband could be Liam Hemsworth. You know, you're like, I was like, maybe. Like,
Yes. Liam. Any other questions? One last question. Anyone? No? Yes? Yes, just out there.
So you talk about Gone Girl as being like an inspiration for your writing, but are there any other books that have inspired you, or ones you're reading now that you are really liking?
So you've talked about how Gone Girl was, you know, an inspiration for you. Are there any other books that have inspired you, or are you reading now that are inspiring your books?
This is always the question that makes me forget the name of every book I've ever read. Every author. I'm like, one of the authors I really admire is Lisa Jewell. I always like, she's had such a like prolific writing career, and I always like that her books kind of end on a little extra twist. I feel like mine kind of end on a bit of a cliffhanger. I like that. I like that, you know, you finish reading it and you're like, oh, that wasn't tied up too neatly. So I'd say someone like Lisa Jewell maybe, and then no other authors are in my head, so I'm sticking with her.
Stick with that. Well, Jess, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you tonight, and congratulations again. It's so exciting. So join me in thanking Jess for being here.